I'm Brendan, I'm your host. I've been in Bitcoin since about 2017. It's a very interesting place to be, and when I first joined, it was really an industry at chaos with itself, and it still is to a certain degree. There's a lot of crypto stuff that's out there that's happening. But anyway, in the 5 years that I've been in the industry, things have evolved a lot, and we're in a place now where we can start to offer some very serious enterprise solutions to people. And I'm very happy to be here today with some of the best companies and people in Australia delivering these solutions and to show them to you here in Brisbane. So, our first session, hopefully if he makes it, is with Morgan Coleman from Lament. His wife is having a baby today, so if he doesn't make it, I will not hold it against him. James Belding from Tokenized will be telling us about smart contracts on a scalable distributed ledger. Tokenized is a great project, quite close to my heart. Eli from AMLA and Anon Survey will be taking us through his new project, Anon Survey, which, I've got the wrong text there, sorry about that. This is all very last minute. In session 2, I'll be speaking, talking about delivering on the promise of Bitcoin. Then we'll hear from the co-founder of Elas, Mohammed Jaber, about private ledgers on public blockchain infrastructure. Then we'll be hearing from Paul Chiari from MetaStream. MetaStream is a company up in Cairns, and they are delivering volume blockchain access solutions. So if you need to publish millions of data points to a public ledger, MetaStream are the guys to be speaking to. Then we're going to hear from Daniel Keane from Predict Ecology, talking about how he is using Bitcoin SV to capture data for ecology and artificial intelligence. Michael Choi from Panda Angel is going to be telling us about MyFabula, which is a new way of telling your personal story. And Robert Lee from the Blockchain Metaverse Association, who will be, and again, I'm sorry there with the incorrect text, telling us about crypto mining future industry in Australia. Finally, we'll be hearing from Cynthia Kai about triple entry accounting with blockchain, and Lise Lee from KE Tech about building on a scalable blockchain. But I'd like to start by talking about Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin really is just the system that was outlined by Satoshi Nakamoto in his 2008 white paper. It's a highly scalable timestamping service for transactions. It's not an investment product. It's not something that you buy and hold and get rich off. It's something that you can use to build, something that you can use to access ledger services. So we're not here to sell you anything today. We won't be talking about investment or giving investment advice. Today is all about using the blockchain in the way it was designed. So Bitcoin is simple. At the core of it, the Bitcoin protocol has just two message types, a transaction message and a block announcement message. This makes it very simple. It means that the rules can be upheld. It means that we can move forward and scale massively without having to change the protocol. And by not having to change the protocol, it means that anybody who's building on top of that protocol can have certainty that the things that they are designing, building, and releasing with their enterprise customers will operate for many years into the future without having to be modified all the time because the underlying protocol keeps changing. And this is something that we see a lot in blockchain and cryptocurrency. Protocols evolving every 6 months and really making it very difficult for projects that use those protocols and use those blockchains as infrastructure to remain operational and remain reliable. So the other thing about Bitcoin is that it's scalable. There's a lot of misinformation out there about how scalable Bitcoin is, but the reality is it can handle massive growth We can handle millions of transactions a day today, and that is only going to get better as we move forward. So Bitcoin is not crypto, and really we are in a process of breaking the link with crypto and Bitcoin. Like I said before, we're not here to sell an investment product. Bitcoin is just a network running a protocol to manage records. Now, on that network, there is a native unit of account, but that unit of account is useful for far more than just investing or hodling. It's actually a core piece of a lot of the technology that we develop, is taking those satoshis and using them to hold value-add information. So taking something that's worth about 1/10,000th of a cent and using it to manage something that might be worth $1 or $1,000 or even $1 billion. Bitcoin is not a ticker symbol. And what we've seen over the past 5 years is an industry so at war with itself that it has tried to kill the original idea of the protocol. And twice we've had to mount fairly aggressive defensive processes, first with Bitcoin Cash and again with Bitcoin SV, to prevent what are essentially malicious changes that break the underlying economics and underlying viability of the system. And that is how we've ended up on the BSV network with Bitcoin, a highly scalable, ready-to-use, enterprise-ready blockchain. And so this is what we use here at Elas. This is what we teach at the Bitcoin Association. It's the only blockchain that we're affiliated with, and it's the only blockchain that we'll be hearing about today. It's a very scalable blockchain. And when I talk about what is scale, I'm really talking about hundreds of millions of transactions per second. Because if you think about it, 10 billion people, each connected, each using, say, 1,000 transactions a day, that's over, well, I had it worked out in my notes, and I don't have them, but I think it's something like 10 trillion transactions a day. It's 100 million transactions a second, and it represents about a terabyte of transactional information every 10 minutes. And that's possible today. We can do that today from an infrastructure perspective, storage, networking. That's not hard. YouTube does 10 times that volume and they lose money. It's the whole thing about achieving that level of scale is so that network miners can achieve profitability. There's no longevity in a system where the only means to profit is by gouging users on huge transaction fees. What we need is massive volume with tiny transaction fees. So we're talking 100 million transactions a second, 1/1000th of a cent per transaction, and that is still enough to generate something like $100 million a day in revenue for miners. So for 1 cent per person in the world, 1,000 transactions each. And that's really what this is about. That to me is scale. At that point, we can get started. We can actually start to build real things. But until we are ready with a system that can accommodate all demand at any day without struggling, without pushing the price of a transaction up tenfold, then it becomes exceptionally difficult to build anything serious. And so scale is really the most important part of the equation here. So Moore's Law. I think Moore's Law has been declared dead more times than Bitcoin, and for a lot longer. And the reality is, since Bitcoin came out, the speed of a computer has increased tenfold. The amount of memory they come with has increased tenfold. The efficiency of computing operations has improved tenfold, and it's only getting better. And so as Moore's law scales our computer hardware, so the network will scale with Moore's law. And in fact, beyond Moore's law, because this will be a focused, specialized infrastructure designed just to handle this type of traffic. And so we can design for-purpose systems. We could talk about that for hours, but we're not going to get into it today. But the next generation node system, which is known as Teranode, is really being designed to manage things in a way that's highly specialized and allowing for multiple diverse use cases to come out. And it's really about managing global demand. And, you know, Satoshi is quoted as saying this back in about 2009. Existing Visa credit card network processes 15 million internet purchases per day worldwide. Well, we know that BSV can already do that. We've done 25 million transactions in a single day. But we're not even close to all global cash transactions, all global credit card transactions, but we can get there. And, you know, I believe it was possible in 2009 to scale far larger than the Visa credit card network. It's possible today to go 10 times further than that. And, you know, that's what we're here to do. So we scale for revenue on the mining side, but we also scale for low fees. Every time we increase the number of transactions through the network, we can drop the price of a transaction and still increase miner revenue. And so this is how we grow, this is how we increase demand. We provide a service that's so cheap that it's impossible not to use it. So most blocks on the BSV network are now picking up transactions at 50 sats per kilobyte. It's possible to do 1 million transactions for about $10. Now that sounds like a crazy number, but I can assure you that's exactly where we're at today. There are contracts operating much cheaper than that, and if you're doing big data, you can definitely cut a deal with miners that will make it even cheaper. So, you know, that's very important to understand, is that it's not just the public market. If you're doing something specific, the miners will talk to you, they will cut you a special deal, they will give you the service that you need. They're here to manage your needs and manage the needs of everyone else who's connecting to the network. And the perils of not scaling really are that every time the demand reaches the capacity of the network, the cost of doing business increases through the roof. And I myself have experienced times where it's cost well over $100 to do a single transaction. And I mean, that's simply not something that we can build on. This kills the value of the network. It kills opportunity. It kills the entrepreneurial spirit. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to who are just beside themselves with gas fees on some of these networks, where it just becomes impossible to do anything. But you know, we can see in the history of Bitcoin, a lot of times when the price of transacting on the network does shoot through the roof, often coincides with a trading hysteria and a big price pump, and then usually the price of using the network gets so high that people stop using it and they leave and the price crashes. And if you have a system where the capacity of the network can always meet the demand, you will never have this situation because the price remains steady for everybody using the network. And so it comes down to how does that transaction fee get broken down? There's a lot of talk these days about how proof of work is a destructive thing, how it's highly inefficient. But when we look at a transaction fee, I always try to imagine Bitcoin as a fully scaled system where there is no longer any block subsidy, and so the only revenue coming into the network is from these transaction fees, from an aggregation of hundreds of millions or billions of 1/1000th of a cent transaction fees. And then knowing that that is the only revenue coming into the network, we can actually work out, well, how much of that is going to get spent on proof of work to secure the transaction. Well, if you're a miner, you're spending a fair bit of money on new equipment. You're building the network, so your capital expenditure is pretty high, maybe 40%. You're doing R&D, you're looking for new sources of energy, you're looking for new types of computer system that can help you process transactions more efficiently, than the other miners in the network, you've got operational costs. You need profit. And so at the end of the day, the amount of money per transaction that you can spend on that proof of work is a very small fraction of that 1/1000th of a cent, maybe 1/10,000th of a cent, or roughly the equivalent amount of electricity needed to run an 11-watt light bulb for about 8 seconds. Now, that is about as efficient as you can get. It's far more efficient than existing legacy credit card systems. It's far more efficient than going to the bank using an ATM. And that is the level of efficiency that we can all have, and it comes with unbreakable security, and it's something that we can take to the bank. You know, the same proof of work that's being done on transactions from all over the world, hundreds of millions of them, can be applied to your transaction for just this tiny amount of money. So I'm sure some of you have heard about the blockchain trilemma. Is this something that, can I see a show of hands? Who's heard of this? Yes? Oh, good. It's just a made-up thing. It's not actually true. The trilemma says that you can't have all three of these things because you can't have scalability and security with decentralization. But the reality is that you can't have security without economics, and you can't have economics without scalability. And so if you can't have scalability and security, you're never going to have decentralization anyway, because you're not going to have a system that can endure. The reality is, scalability brings growth and investment into the network. That growth and investment brings revenue for miners. A blockchain is no better than its network. So if that network is not making revenue, steady revenue, revenue that it can depend on, revenue that doesn't change with demand, or revenue that doesn't change the rate at which it comes in based on demand, the blockchain can't grow. There's no money to build. It's important to understand that nodes are miners. At the center of the network, there's a dedicated group of systems, and their only job is to collate, validate, and timestamp every transaction that happens on the network in real time. These are hyper-specialized computers. They're very densely connected to each other, and they run the network for us. Anyone who's running a Raspberry Pi and calling it a node is mistaken. They are not nodes. They are just parasitic systems that are essentially being used to prevent the blockchain from scaling. Now, once you have that hyper-connected core, everything else that you do on the outer edges of the layer is controlled and managed by users. We're now in a situation where you own your own data, so you are responsible for it. But thanks to SPV, we have techniques for allowing that data to be kept with a timestamp, with a link back to the blockchain, so that it can be presented to anybody, anytime in the future, and they can have the certainty of that network security. The MetaNet is a protocol invented by a guy who lives in the UK, and it is really something that is going to allow us to start taking all of the data that is housed on servers connected to the internet and writing it onto the public ledger in such a way that anybody accessing that information will be able to know that the information they're being presented with is what was created by the person that owns that data. So in other words, we're going to flip the table on the delivery model for the internet, moving completely away from client-server systems to a system where you essentially pull the data that you need directly off the blockchain. Your device unpacks it and opens it for you, holds it in a cache, and any data that you are reading or writing through that platform will either come from or go on to the public ledger. And so in this system, you no longer need to be connected to some back-end at Facebook. You no longer need to be sending them your information. They no longer need to have your data for you to use their service. I think that's a very exciting thing. It's something that we use extensively at Elas to build the tools and systems that we create. And I think for anybody who's looking at building applications on the BSV blockchain, it's something that you need to be looking at now, because the companies in the space are really learning how to use it. They're starting to really begin to deploy some fairly innovative technologies across it, and it's a way that you can create things that are done in wholly, fundamentally new ways than ever before. So Daniel's asking, is it plausible right now to take data that exists on a server and transfer it to the metanet? And I would say absolutely, yes it is. So the whole thing with the metanet is what you're building is a structured ledger on the public blockchain. I saw a question up the back. Hi.
So we're talking about blockchain and then you talk about BSV.
Uh-huh.
What differences from the Bitcoin blockchain, to the BSV blockchain? Because you talk about scalability, but most of us know that the blockchain, Bitcoin blockchain is very slow. It takes about 10 minutes for a block to be verified. I mean, we wouldn't want to have a bank card that's Bitcoin blockchain, because we go to a petrol station, or we can forever wait for the transaction.
Yeah. So that's...
So what's the differences from Bitcoin blockchain to the Bitcoin SV division? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. This is the only blockchain we're
Sure.
talking about today, right?
Yep. So what I would say is firstly that the BSV blockchain is the Bitcoin blockchain. BTC, which is what is called Bitcoin, is not really Bitcoin. They've actually made so many changes to the underlying protocol and the rules that they use that it doesn't resemble the white paper anymore. So we say that this is Bitcoin. There is a bit of a misconception that you need to wait for the miners to timestamp your transaction. That's not really true. If you're doing business peer-to-peer, end-to-end, like was described in the white paper, peer-to-peer electronic cash, what essentially happens is that as soon as the transaction is made, it can be broadcast to the network and you can know straight away whether or not it's been accepted. And you would have like a service level agreement where you would know that if a miner has responded with a particular type of message, that transaction is definitely going to be mined into the next blockchain. And so you don't need to wait at that point, because you know that they've already done the work of validating your transaction. They've already put it into their block template and they're already spending money doing proof of work on your transaction. And so at that point, they're not going to go in and pull it out and change it. So it's really... Well, that's BTC. That's because they've so broken the system that if I don't pay a high enough fee, I don't know when my transaction will get mined, and potentially it will never get mined. And so that's a problem that they've created by limiting the size of the blocks. And so on the BSV network, where there's no limit on the size of a block, it doesn't matter how many transactions pour into the network, they all get timestamped in the next block. Yeah. Okay. Last question. Oh, okay. Sure. Well, that would just be the transaction itself taking place. So when I go in and I tap, that's the transaction. I'm presenting the transaction to you. It's got some signed Satoshis that or whatever it is, tokens. It's confirmed, yes, zero confirmation. So essentially, as soon as you've got the response from the network that the transaction's valid, that's it. You don't need to wait for anything else.